Hello, fellow readers, and welcome to our bookish oasis. Today, we embark on a transformative journey through the thought-provoking pages of Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Also, thank you very much for your support. Advented. Russ Hildebrandt was an associate minister at First Reformed Church in New Prospect, Illinois. After he was humiliated 3 years earlier and forced off the youth group team Crossroads, the senior pastor Dwight Hafel increased Russ's share of pastor visitations. Today, Russ was delivering toys and canned goods to the community of God downtown. He was thrilled that a new parishioner, the attractive widow, Frances Cottrell, was accompanying him. Her husband had died in the war, though Russ had a wife, Marion, and 4 children. He was attracted to Frances. She made his youthful self feel alive again. When he arrived at First Reformed to meet Frances, he avoided passing Rick Ambrose's office. Ambrose was the youth programming director, and they had not been talking since Rush had left Crossroads. After doing grief counseling with Frances, Russ had invited her to join his Tuesday women's group doing service in the inner city. Frances's first Tuesday trip did not go well. She had tried to connect with the retarded neighborhood boy Ronnie, who wandered in and out of the church in all seasons. His mother, who was an addict, found them together and grew upset. The Community of God pastor Theo scolded Frances for getting involved. Frances was upset and talked to Russ about it on the way back. Russ assured her it would get easier if she kept showing up. The incident had made Russ feel even more attracted to Frances. She was eager to help, but still needed him to be a good pastor to her 13. While waiting for Frances in the lot, Russ felt excited. He had even worn his old sheepskin coat from Arizona, hoping it might lend him a bit of an edge. When he saw the Crossroads teenagers buzzing around, he realized that his son, Perry, might spot him with Frances. Frances bounded up to Russ. Her excitement made Russ wonder what it would be like to live with a person capable of joy. Perry Hildebrandt wondered about the relationship between the body and the soul. He decided that having blackouts did not necessarily suggest a division of soul and body. Today, Perry felt wonderful. Time seemed to stop. When he returned home to the parsonage, he ascended into the 3rd floor, a space he had formerly claimed to smoke weed. Now, Perry was trying to be good. His first initiative was to buy Christmas presents for his family. He wanted to get Judson, his younger brother, with whom Perry was closest, something special. Realizing he would need more money, he decided to sell the last of his drug stash. Perry had also recently joined Crossroads, hoping it would turn him into a bed person. The experience was unexpected. Then, 11 days ago, Perry and Becky had been randomly paired for a Crossroads exercise. During the exercise, they were supposed to talk openly about their admiration for and frustrations with each other. Becky told Perry that she knew he did and sold drugs. She also felt his intellect and vocabulary made him condescending. Though the conversation had been difficult for Perry, it made him think. Perry respected Becky's words because she was, for once, being open about her feelings. However, it had been hard to hear through Becky that both she and Ambrose thought Perry was trouble. Ambrose was the first adult Perry thought he could respect and look up to. Perry sold his stash to his friend, then went to the camera store and bought Judson a compact movie camera. Afterwards, he felt pleased with himself. Then, while walking, he looked up to see his father driving with Larry Cottrell's foxy mother, Frances. Perry and Russ met eyes. On the first day of winter break, Becky felt happy. Last night, she had her first kiss, and the sweetness of the experience stayed with her. When she got up, she saw everything through the eyes of a woman a man had kissed. Until Tanner Evans, she had had no interest in boys. Instead of helping Judson with the sugar cookies, Becky sat near the Christmas tree and worked on her college essay. She was responding to the prompt tell us about a person you admire, Franzen's italics. She began writing about her older brother Clem, with whom she had a close relationship. Everything she wrote felt wrong. She did not doubt her connection with him, but her essay sounded juvenile. She scrapped the draft and started writing instead about her late Aunt Shirley. Amidst her work, her mother told her she had to attend an open house for clergy that evening at the Hayfless. They got into an argument. Becky had plans to attend Tanner's concert. Becky's draft about Shirley felt more authentic. She also liked writing about her because her mother hated Shirley. Becky and Shirley had had a special relationship, and Becky had been dazzled by her aunt. Before Shirley's death, Becky had spent summers with her in Manhattan. With time, Becky began to realize how lonely Shirley was. Then the family learned that Shirley had cancer. When she died, she left Becky $13,000 to take a trip to Europe. Becky's parents urged her to forgo the trip and share the money with her brothers. In her room, Becky thought about Tanner. The only problem with their kiss was that he had a girlfriend, Laura Dobrinsky, who was his female counterpart in Crossroads and was in his band. One night, Tanner was playing at Grove, the place Becky worked. Afterwards, he had urged her to join Crossroads. Though he had offended her, she eventually attended, surprised by what she found. Though Becky was popular, Crossroads offered her something different. Eventually, Crossroads inspired her to become religious. In the meantime, the more passing interactions she had with Tanner, the more interested she became in him. During one Crossroads meeting, Becky spoke to Ambrose about her crush. He seemed to encourage her to take a risk and pursue Tanner despite his relationship. She wrote to him, confessing her feelings. She attended Sunday service so she could give him the note. She and Tanner ended up having a lengthy conversation, and Becky withheld the note. Becky was pleased, especially since her relationship with Clem had been strained. When he was home for Thanksgiving, he had told her about his girlfriend, Sharon. His obsession with her disgusted Becky. She was, however, glad when Clem convinced Russ that Becky should keep her inheritance money. The next time Becky saw Tanner after their lengthy conversation, he was still with Laura. She confronted him. They argued. Realizing how upset Tanner was that she had been cold to him, she ran out to the lot and straight into his arms. She had to see him tonight to make sure it was over with Laura. Clem felt desperate to take action in his life. Because he had been doing poorly in school ever since dating Sharon, he decided to drop out and write to the draft board. He had been excused from serving in Vietnam because of academic deferment. Now he realized that he had a responsibility to be overseas. Sharon's brother was in Vietnam, and she believed that Clem did not understand his privilege. Clem had also become powerless to control himself since he started sleeping with Sharon. His once superior willpower was nullified by his constant sexual desire. He needed an excuse to escape her. After finishing a paper, Clem met up with Sharon. She made breakfast and poured champagne. He wanted to resist her advances but could not. While they were having sex, Sharon told Clem she was in love with him. Although initially disgusted, Clem suddenly felt that he fully possessed this person and was thrilled by that conquest. She repeatedly asked Clem to say he loved her too, but he could not. Sharon burst into tears. Feeling guilty, Clem told her he was going to Vietnam. They argued. Clem left. On his way back to New Prospect, he realized that his decision was aimed squarely at his father, whom he had grown to hate. When he was young, he had looked up to Russ. Russ's fallout with Crossroads, however, changed everything for Clem. Russ now appeared like a weak, moral fraud. Marion ran out of the house feeling overweight and ugly. She had been desperately trying to lose weight, but nothing was working. Though she had not been eating much when she passed the cookies Judson was decorating, she felt powerless to resist them. Her appearance and her status as minister's wife made her feel invisible. Russ did not desire her, nor did other men. Motherhood made her featureless to her children, 127. No one in New Prospect or First Reformed actively disliked her. Yet there was no one she could call a close friend. She was on her way to her therapy session. No one knew she was seeing a psychiatrist. When she was young, Marion had been a Catholic. Catholicism had helped her reform. Then, when she met Rush, she made herself a level-headed Protestant, 128. Roughly a year ago, Marion had begun noticing changes in Perry's behavior that troubled her. His sleep troubles and problems at school reminded her of her own youthful struggles with mental health. Seeing Dr. Sophie Seraphimides made Marion miss being a Catholic. Guilt played a different role in Catholicism than it did in Protestantism. She felt bad for hiding the sessions from her family. She felt guilty for her past and all the lies she had told about it. During her session, Marion confessed to eating 6 sugar cookies. She talked a lot about her weight to Sophie. She also talked about her children and husband. She was convinced that Russ had lied to her that morning. She assumed he was spending the day with Frances and had hidden it from her. Sophie seemed eager to demonize Russ. The conversation did not feel helpful. Marion knew she had committed terrible sins and felt that she deserved punishment. For one, she had never told Russ that she'd spent 14 weeks in a mental hospital in Los Angeles in 1940, one following a severe psychotic episode. She had also told Russ that she had been married and divorced before they met. This was a lie. In reality, after her father squandered the family money and committed suicide, and her mother descended into alcoholism, Marion was sent to live with her abusive uncle. She eventually got a job at a car dealership where she won the attention of a married salesman named Bradley Grant. One night after work, she and Bradley kissed. He expressed his interest in her with a poem. When he gave her a second poem, her shame quickly turned to obsession. Though Bradley said he could not abandon his wife and sons, they kept seeing each other. Trouble with Bradley, however, soon inspired Marion's psychotic break. She became very, very low. Bradley soon realized she was unwell and tried to end the relationship. This only amplified Marion's obsession. Then Marion realized she was pregnant. Convinced that Bradley would leave his wife for her, she showed up at his house and told his wife, "Your husband doesn't love you anymore." When Bradley found out, he gave her money to leave him alone. The breakup led to another psychotic episode. Desperate to abort the baby, Marion sought out her old friend, Isabel. When she arrived at Isabel's supposed address, a white-bearded man invited her in. He owned the building and gave young girls room and board in exchange for sexual favors. He told Marion he would take care of her and the abortion in exchange for sex. Desperate, Marion agreed. This happened during Christmas time. Since then, Marian hated Christmas time. Since then, Marian hated Christmas. She could not, however, bring herself to relay this story to Sophie. However, after Sophie kept prodding, even offering to extend the session for free, Marian gave in. In the car with Russ, Frances called attention to Perry on the street. Russ felt overwhelmed by guilt. Frances said that her son, Larry, admired Perry. Then she asked Russ how old he thought his kids should be before they try marijuana. Her question surprised Russ. Frances said when she had come home one day, she found Larry smelling of pot. Because he had been spending time with Perry, she assumed Perry had given it to him. Shocked, Russ silently blamed Marian. She had a special affection for Perry and excused everything he did. Frances continued talking, mentioning her relationship with a surgeon named Philip, who Larry did not like. Russ felt embarrassed. He had not known she was seeing anyone. Frances admitted that she did not miss her husband. As Frances talked more about Larry, Russ could not stop thinking about Perry and Marian. Russ had recently felt repelled by Perry's bad character and now by his smug enjoyment of the secret of his drug use. Frances admitted that she had also gone to Ambrose about Larry. This offended Russ. Frances confessed that she was not too worried. She said she felt as if she had been born too early. If she had been born later, she would have gotten to experience the youth culture their children were experiencing. Russ argued that current youth culture was already happening in the early 50s. Then Frances suggested that they smoke the weed she had confiscated from Larry. She thought they could invite Marian and another parishioner, Kitty, to try it with them. Surprised and excited, Russ convinced Frances that the two of them should smoke it alone. While Becky and Tanner were kissing in Tanner's Verba.Vividus the night before, a group of girls approached 203. Becky pulled a blanket over her head. Tanner pretended to be alone because one of the girls, Sally Perkins, had invited Tanner back inside. Becky felt obliged to leave. They made plans to meet at Treble Cleef, the music store where he worked, before his concert the following evening. At Treble Cleef, Becky and Tanner talked in the van. Tanner discussed his musical career. When he mentioned Laura, Becky felt confused. She asked him what she meant to him. Tanner tried explaining the complexities of his relationship with Laura. Feeling hurt, Becky left, deciding to attend the Halfless party after all. Becky cried in bed. Perry came to comfort her. She pushed him away. Perry insisted on being nice, which softened Becky. He told her to go to the concert, and he would take Judson to the Halfles instead. Becky felt that she'd caught a glimmer of Perry's goodness and readied herself for the concert. Years before moving to New Prospect, Russ and Marian had been the it couple. Once they moved and started their family, everything changed. When Ambrose arrived at First Reformed, he awakened the church's political sleepiness. Russ and Ambrose had run Crossroads together. Ambrose's youthful presence attracted innumerable new members. Laura and Tanner were among the new converts. Laura particularly disliked Russ. She and the other hip Crossroads attendees were offended when Russ ruined their spring trip to Arizona. The trip was designed for service work. Russ had switched buses and work sites with Ambrose, jealous of his popularity with the kids. When they got back, the teens voted Russ out of Crossroads. A meeting with Ambrose, Sally, and Laura revealed that Russ had made the girls feel uncomfortable. Russ admitted that he had opened up to Sally about his marriage during an exercise, but had not meant to overstep his boundaries. At the Community of God, while unloading toys, Frances tried giving Theo coloring supplies for Ronnie. Another argument ensued. The conflict inspired a difficult conversation on the drive. When Francis finally softened, Russ fantasized about what might happen in the dark of his office when they got back. Distracted, Russ lost control of the car in the snow. Perry imagined himself giving an address about the positive definition of goodness. Franzen's italics. He was wondering if what he had done for Becky was really done out of goodness, or if it was inherently selfish. He had been nice to her because he did not want her to narc him out to their parents. While preparing for the party, Perry received a call from Russ. He had been in an accident and would be late for the party. Perry promised to give Marion the message, though he had no idea where she was. Once Judson was settled with the other kids at the party, Perry drank several cups of glögg, a Swedish alcoholic beverage. He told himself that he was not really being bad. He then conversed with two clergymen about good deeds and selfishness. Mrs. Heifel seemed determined to ruin Perry's evening. When she told him he should not be drinking and should join the other children, Perry snapped. He looked up in shame and dismay to see his mother at the door. Becky rushed to First Reform to see Tanner. Inside, she encountered Kim Perkins and David Goya. They immediately involved Becky in their argument. They wanted to know if she thought the concert was a public event or a Crossroads activity. If it was the former, they could smoke and drink while there. If it was the latter, they could only smoke and drink before arriving. Becky had no interest in the debate, but weighed in anyway. When they moved outside to smoke, they invited Becky to join. She found herself following. Smoking weed flooded the same nerves that kissing Tanner had lit up the night before. After therapy, Marion went to the public library. In the white pages, she found Bradley Grant's phone number. The number felt like a key to her heart. She was still thinking about everything she had told Sophie. Sophie had suggested that Marion was trying to replicate the pain she thought she deserved from the landlord and Bradley in her marriage to Russ. She suggested that Marion's anxiety, depression, body, dysmorphia, and insomnia were all symptoms of her trauma. Marion resisted these theories, insisting that she had stopped feeling guilty about Russ and about the landlord. Her lingering guilt was about Perry and the child of Bradley's. Then Sophie had asked who the real Marion was. Marion said that the real her was thin. Marion left the office angry. Afterwards, she went to the old corner drugstore and bought 2 packs of cigarettes. Though she had quit years ago and knew that cigarettes had killed her sister, Marion rationalized the purchase. She felt out of breath on her walk home. She decided she would not attend the party. Instead, she stopped at Kitty's house. Kitty was the woman Russ had told her he was taking with him to the community of God. Kitty's brother said that Kitty had been home all day. Marion understood that Russ had lied. At the parsonage, she found a note from Perry relaying Russ's message and explaining his Judson's and Becky's whereabouts. She felt a rush of love and guilt. After another cigarette, she went to the Halfless. Inside, the party atmosphere noticeably shifted. She realized Perry was yelling. Doris Hoffley explained what had happened. Marion silently called her an insufferable bitch, Franzen's italics. After having dropped his things at the parsonage, Clem went to First Reformed to find Becky. No one knew where she was. When Clem discovered that she had smoked weed, he was appalled. Finally, he went to his father's office. Russ seemed not at all happy to see his son. Clem was surprised to see Frances in the office with him. Russ insisted that Clem help Frances dig out her car. On her way out of the sanctuary, Becky ran into Gig Benedetti, the man who had come to scout Tanner's band. He thought Becky was Laura. When Becky realized that Gig was interested in signing Tanner's band because of Laura, she grew worried. She was shocked to run into Clem afterwards. She felt even worse when Tanner kissed her and told her he had ended things with Laura. Becky felt guilty that she had made such a big deal about them breaking up. She feared the breakup would ruin their chances with Gig. When Tanner refused to patch things up with Laura for the sake of the show, Becky decided to talk to Laura herself. Meanwhile, Clem kept following after her. Becky insisted he stay out of her business. Feeling a new and overwhelming hatred towards him, Becky started walking away. Clem said something unkind about Tanner. Becky told Clem to go to hell. Becky told Clem to go to hell. Russ saw his evening with Frances as a Christmas gift. He read everything she said as an advance. She had even agreed to go inside with him, at first reformed, so he could lend her his blues records. In the office, he was close to standing between her legs while she sat in his chair. They talked again about smoking together. Russ said he was open to experimenting with her. Just as Frances was moving to leave, Clem knocked on the door. In the lot, after Russ and Clem dug out her car, Frances had called him back over. What she said made him believe he had a chance with her. She wanted to go to Arizona with Crossroads and urged him to make amends with Ambrose so he could go too. Russ felt like the Apostle Peter when he denied to Clem at least 3 times that he lusted after Frances. After their argument, Russ returned to his office and considered masturbating. Instead, he prayed. He felt guilty for hurting his son. Finally, he made his way up the hallway to see Ambrose. Russ explained that they needed to talk. Then he unleashed all of his feelings. He explained how hurt he had been by him and how hateful he felt towards him. No matter what Ambrose said, Russ became angry. Finally, filled a collection plate with water and washed Ambrose's feet. Although Russ initially resisted, the gesture softened him. He broke down in tears. He told Ambrose he wanted to go to Arizona. Becky followed Laura's snowy footprints to her apartment above the neighboring drugstore. She found Laura stuffing her things in a bag. Laura said she was going to San Francisco. She had no interest in delaying her departure for Tanner's sake. Feeling desperate, Becky kneeled down to pray. This angered Laura. She hit Becky across the side of the head. Feeling guilty, she kneeled beside Becky and apologized. She said that she had moved in with Tanner's family years ago because her father had been abusive. She felt bad for repeating his behaviors. When Laura finally agreed to play with the band, Becky felt as if God had rewarded her with a whole new life. At the church, Becky talked to Gig. He seemed intrigued by her. She said if he signed the band, he would be seeing a whole lot of her. As Clem approached the parsonage, he noticed his mother sitting on the front porch with a cigarette. While they smoked together, Clem told her about Vietnam and about Sharon. Marion was quiet. She urged him inside for something to eat and drink. In the kitchen, Clem suddenly started crying. Marion held him, saying if he loved Sharon, he should go to her. If he was not going to call her now, Marion said he should drive back to her immediately. Late in the evening, Perry found himself on the far side of the tracks. He was desperate for weed. He tried buying his stash back from his friend, but the friend had refused. Then He went back to the church and asked his friends if they had anything to smoke. David said they were all out. When he ran into Larry, he pressed Larry to steal some liquor from his mother and bring it back to the church. Feeling guilty afterwards, Perry resolved that embracing badness accords power. He imagined himself giving a speech on the subject. Perry became so desperate that he walked all the way to his handler. The guy was edgy and irritable. He said he did not have any weed, but he had something else. He cut Perry a deal. Though he normally did not do anything besides weed, Perry held out his hand for the pills. Russ felt triumphant. He had secured a place on the Crossroads spring trip. On his way home, Russ worried that Marion would notice his sheepskin coat and suspect him, then realized he no longer cared if Marion knew he'd spent the day with Frances. He reviewed the hours with Frances, comparing her to Marion. He blamed his wife for his unhappiness. Russ found Marion at the table. They talked briefly about Clem. When Marion started smoking, Russ was shocked. Then his accident came up. Russ felt dragged down by the inertia of marriage. Marion spoke blatantly about Frances. She said a life with Frances would never work. Russ was furious. Their dialogue intensified. Watching his wife smoke and drink suddenly made her appear like a different person. Provoked by her abandon, Russ tried touching and kissing her. Marion pulled away. She said he had her permission to be with Frances. Clem was at the station. A series of delays gave him time to think. He realized that if he wanted radical freedom, he could not go to Sharon. He headed for New Orleans instead. Easter. The next morning, Russ prayed in bed. Everything about the previous night frightened him. 373. He found Marion wrapping presents in his office. As soon as he saw her, he told her that Perry had sold or given marijuana to Larry. Marion was unfazed, revealing that Perry had already told her. Her response made Russ hateful. During dinner, Russ abruptly left the table. He went to the third floor to call Frances. Seeing Marion's ashtray felt like permission. He told Frances about his conversation with Ambrose. He pressed her about smoking together. Frances hurried to get off the phone. In the weeks following, Frances became distant, even ignoring Russ during the Tuesday Circle's outings. Finally, Frances confessed that she had been avoiding him because she had broken his records. She had wanted to replace them before telling him. Then they made a date to meet up and smoke. Not long before the spring trip, Russ received a call from his old friend Keith DeRoshi, who lived and worked on the Black Mesa. He warned Russ of current tensions in the community, urging him not to go to Kitsilly. The other reservation work site, Many Farms, would be safer. On Ash Wednesday, Russ went to Frances's house to smoke. She said she wanted him to tell her everything he felt as he felt it. Russ became increasingly paranoid. When Frances made physical advances, Russ felt overwhelmed. Finally, he raced out of the house. In an effort to accept his failure with Frances, Russ had Kitty take over Tuesday Circle and humbled himself with Marion. She had lost a lot of weight and reminded him of the intense young woman he'd fallen for. Marion pushed him away. Meanwhile, Russ had rejoined Crossroads. One day, he and Larry were paired up for an exercise. During the exercise, Larry complained about Frances's relationship with the surgeon. Russ realized she had gone back to him after the marijuana experiment. Afterwards, Russ called Frances. Frances apologized for what had happened between them. Not long later, on a gray March morning, she came into his office and told him she was leaving the church because she felt like a bad person. Russ tried convincing her otherwise, picking up on what she had said about liking difficult men. He angrily insisted that if she left, she was a coward. In the weeks leading up to the Arizona trip, Russ did everything he could to ensure that he and Frances were chaperoning the same worksite. Ambrose acted suspicious. On the day of their departure, Russ was distracted by Frances when some of the kids told him they were worried about Perry. Realizing that Perry was delaying their departure, Russ went inside to find him. Perry was in the bathroom, acting oddly. Russ asked if he was on drugs, but Perry denied it. Russ decided that Perry would be fine under the supervision of Kevin Anderson, another chaperone. Russ had a special connection to Arizona and the people on the reservation because he had worked with them during the war. As a conscientious objector, he had been on a nearby work assignment. When he met Keith, he had become interested in learning about the Navajos and realized the only way to do so was to spend time with them. During his time there, his views on Christianity evolved. On the Mesa, God was in everything. When he left, he explored other faiths. It was at a Catholic Mass that he met Marian. Once he fell in love with her, Russ adopted every conviction of hers, including premarital sex. Despite his old friend's warnings, Russ insisted his team go to Kitsilli to finish building the school. On their way, a group of men blocked the road. They told Russ they did not want their help. Although angry, the men eventually let Russ's group pass. Russ did his best to keep the teenagers' morale up. One night, they returned to find their cabin broken into and their belongings missing. When Russ said he was going to go talk to the men who had done this, Frances insisted on accompanying him. Despite her eagerness, on the drive up the hill, Frances jerked away when Russ tried touching her. At the top of the ridge, Russ and Frances encountered Clyde, the man they were looking for. Russ demanded that he return the stolen property. The men got into a long argument. Finally, Clyde showed Russ the reason for his upset. He led them down a trail and showed them a coal mine in the distance. Clyde was furious that Keith and the tribal council had approved the mine. The men eventually reached an agreement. Back in the car, Frances praised the way Russ had handled the situation. Then they stopped at a little cabin so she could use the bathroom. Once inside, she pressed against him and kissed him fervently. Russ was desperate to be with her. Even Marian had slept with more than one person. After repositioning several times, Russ and Frances had sex. In the car, Russ said he had no regrets at all. At the bottom of the hill, a group of people waited for them. Perry was lying in the bottom bunk, desperate to get high. He feared raising his bunkmate Larry's suspicions by getting up or making noise. Ever since he started using cocaine, Perry became convinced that he, Perry, was God. He began regarding everything and everyone around him as beneath him. If he were indeed God, Perry decided, then his mind truly had limitless capacities. The night Perry had gone to his handler, he had discovered new drugs and the way they empowered him. He realized that it was not his mind that was the problem, but his body, its exhaustible muscles. If he could alter his somatic rhythms, he could solve his issues. The drugs soon became an obsession and an addiction. He had used nearly all of his money, and even stolen Clem's money, in order to secure more. Becky had given them each a portion of her inheritance, and Perry used it for the cocaine. Perry tried to surreptitiously get a bump under his blanket. Larry heard him and asked what was going on. Perry responded with excited irritation. When Larry said he was going to get Kevin because Perry was worrying him, Perry told him to stay in bed. Without waiting for a response, Perry raced down the hallway. He had wanted to come on the trip to procure some peyote. He had talked to a few young Navajos the night before and made plans to meet at a nearby gas station. He ran outside and headed to the meetup location. When he told the men what he wanted, they laughed at him. Perry promised to pay a lot of money. They agreed to drive him to a guy named Flint. He brought peyote from Texas for the tribe to use in their ceremonies. On the drive, Perry talked excitedly, irritating his companions. When they arrived at their location, they took Perry's money and told him to wait. They returned saying that Flint wanted to talk to Perry. Perry ventured out with a flashlight. He felt increasingly disoriented. His mind grew dark and then light. There were shapes in the distance. Then he found himself moving towards a shape and flames engulfing it. There were wooden pallets and a splash of gasoline, but Perry did not know what was happening. Marion took Judson to Los Angeles while Russ and Perry were in Arizona. The atmosphere flooded her with memories. For 3 months, she had been consumed by the urgency of seeing Bradley. Now, she felt the flutter of fear or guilt. She left Judson with her uncle's partner and ventured out. On the way, she saw a sign that made her think of Perry. She recalled their last conversation. She hoped he was okay. When she arrived at Bradley's, she encountered a man who looked entirely different than she remembered. She realized that Russ was much more handsome than Bradley. He ushered her inside. Throughout the time they spent together, Marion realized the reason she had come. She also realized that Bradley expected the same thing. They vacillated between talk of the present and the past. Finally, she realized she needed to leave. As she drove away, she felt a sense of elation. She was glad she had resisted her impulses. Once she was caught in traffic, she wished she had made the opposite decision. When she returned to her uncle's house, she had several messages from Russ. On the phone, Russ explained what had happened to Perry. He had not only been found high and in possession of illegal drugs, but had burned down a farm building on the reservation. Marion stayed calm and consoled Russ, promising to meet him the next day. In New Mexico, Marion and Russ got a room near the facility where Perry was being held. They talked honestly with one another. Russ confessed what had happened with Frances and his guilt over ignoring Perry. Instead of getting upset, Marion urged them to pray together. Then she told Russ she wanted to have sex. Afterwards, Russ was emotionally overwhelmed. He insisted that he did not deserve Marion. For several months, Becky had been happy. She was excited to graduate, satisfied with her relationship, and uplifted by her newfound faith. She had been accepted to college, and she and Tanner were planning to spend the summer in Europe together. Shortly before spring break, Becky had a conversation with Marion. Marion had pointedly asked her if she and Tanner had had sex. If they were going overseas together, Marion said Becky would have to have the proper protection. When she returned from the gynecologist with the proper gear, Becky felt that love had been reduced to something medical. Although Becky's faith made her hesitant about losing her virginity after obtaining contraception, she wondered if withholding herself from the man she loved might constitute a kind of vanity. Besides, Becky had felt herself especially annoyed with her family of late. Her relationship with Clem also remained strained. Being with Tanner would ease her frustrations. One night, Becky had a conversation with Gig that made her worried about traveling to Europe. Though Tanner thought he could make connections overseas, Gig said if he wanted a future in music, he should remain stateside. When she confronted Tanner, he insisted that as long as he was with Becky, there was no such thing as a mistake. Becky suddenly felt resolved to have sex with Tanner and go to Europe together. By September, Becky and Tanner had been traveling for months. She had no interest in returning home. Tanner's music was going well, and they had met many nice people. However, after missing several periods, Becky had begun to worry. She did not know what to do. She did not want to talk to her family, with whom she had had an even worse falling out. After her parents took her money to pay for Perry's medical care, she stopped speaking to them. Then one night, while riding with a careless driver, Becky began praying. She realized that she wanted a chance to live and a chance for the unborn soul in her to see the light. She promised God that if she was pregnant, she would not harm her child. After New Orleans, Clem had moved to Lima. The lifestyle was fulfilling. He wished he had left the cities earlier. Throughout his time away, he received letters from his family. His mother's letters were the sort that you had to force yourself to read. Marion wrote to him about Perry's condition, their tenuous finances, and Becky's detachment. After discovering she was pregnant, Becky had married Tanner and left the family. Although Marion and Russ saw her at church, she refused to talk to or visit with them. Clem worried about his sister, realizing that she was still the person he loved most in the world. He wrote to her, and Becky responded. Hearing from her made him desperate to return home. He left Lima immediately. He found Becky at a local softball game. He felt strange seeing her as a mother. They talked about his reasons for returning and all that had transpired in their family. Becky said she was not attending her parents' Easter gathering and invited Clem to her house instead. Clem realized that Becky needed nothing from him or their parents. He told her he would have to think about it, although he already knew what he would do. Becky felt as if she were experiencing things she never knew she could. When Laura joined the group, Becky felt anxious and fell into a bush. Then Sally realized that Becky had been the one hiding in Tanner's van the night before. Becky tried denying it. Laura got upset. Some indiscriminate amount of time passed. Becky eventually fled the scene. She found herself in the sanctuary, overcome by the evil waves and zags. In her head, she prayed for mercy. In her head, she prayed for mercy. She felt as if she had glimpsed the light of God. Her husband was more understanding. Marion left Judson and took Perry home. On the walk back, Marion explained everything about hers and her father's manic depression. She also told Perry about her stint in the hospital. At home, Perry led Marion upstairs to smoke. He showed her how the exhaust fan pulled the smoke outside. When she asked how he knew this, he revealed his stash box and explained that he had been smoking and selling. Marion realized how little she knew. Clem protested, but ultimately gave in. He was bothered by the energy between Russ and Frances. He confronted his father, but Russ denied his accusations. When the argument worsened, Clem burst out that he had quit school and was going to Vietnam. Russ thought Clem was trying to hurt him. When he realized he was serious, Russ softened. Clem felt confused that his father still loved him. As he fled, he was overwhelmed by guilt. After they had sex, Marion told him about her ex-husband. Russ was hurt and angry. Per his grandfather's advice, he went back to Marion. Though his grandfather had said not to marry her right away, Russ did so anyway. His parents disowned him afterwards. Over the years, his infatuation with Marion dissipated. It was not until he had a dream about Sally Perkins that he felt reawakened to the multitude